I was recently trying the Into the Darkness public playtest, the latest in the ever-growing list of promising physics-based VR projects which seem to be stuck in eternal development hell for reasons we'll likely never know the truth of. And upon finishing it, I was met with a very familiar sense of foreboding specific to these types of VR games. Physics-based interactions and reactions as a primary is a natural fit for VR and motion controls to realize its great potential, and I think they are inevitable for the medium once its game developers rediscover the much better programming skills and industry practices we used to have in the early 2000s, which gave gaming much better physics results than we typically get now, on hardware an order of magnitude less powerful. But even if we do eventually manage to claw our way back from this industry-wide regression to higher quality standards, 2 decades old, and are able to reclaim this physics potential, that by itself won't be enough to make an interesting and enduring game which resonates with the public conscience. All the physics in the world implemented into a VR game won't matter in the end if there is no meaningful context and solid gameplay design to act as a foundation for these to support. But all too often with VR games which tout their physics interactions as something revolutionary, I get an experience which mistakenly puts these physics, often janky, as the primary foundation, underpinning everything else and thus severely hamstringing the potential for any meaningfully authored, interesting, and satisfying gameplay design. Combat and conflict is usually the worst to suffer here, becoming farcical with how unthreatening, unbelievable, jank, and exploitable your typical enemy becomes, requiring immense suspension of disbelief from the player to take seriously as the dominance of the underlying physics system results in utterly brain-dead enemy design and behavior which the player can absolutely steamroll through with the most pathetic minimum of effort. Why should a dynamic reactive physics system matter when we're immediately given a gun and can one-shot headshot the barely aware enemies which are just a pain to deal with up close otherwise? Why should we try to take advantage of these systems by grabbing an arm or attempting to leg sweep a combatant when the very same physics system requires the enemies be designed so rigidly, just so they can do the basic behaviors like stand up and move, that they can barely have any intelligence, personality, or react to the player's actions to begin with? There is no adequate meaning or reward for going to all that extra effort, particularly when most enemy encounters are akin to boring, mindless bots with no sense of awareness or self-preservation. Swinging a sword is not rewarding or interesting when the slightest velocity and distance behaves like a full-force deadly slash. Seriously, what the hell are we doing here with this kind of implementation? It is an actual insulting waste of everyone's time and motion controls in general. And why swing a sword when you can just effortlessly pull off an enemy's limb without any sense of resistance or force, as if these advanced combat robots were all made of candy floss? The kind of physics implementation here limits and contradicts the design, which contradicts the visuals, which contradicts the player actions. Nothing feels good, satisfying, complete, or even sensical on a basic level. Everything looks, feels, and plays wrong, and as a player you're left feeling hollow and underwhelmed, and certainly not entertained. Physics systems can be a massive additive part of a game experience, and in VR these systems make more sense to have in many more cases than we typically consider for flat screen. Physics can absolutely still be the star of a show and lead to all kinds of fun and impressiveness to complement and reward the player. But unless the experience is explicitly stated as a bare-bones physics sandbox, often used as a cop-out excuse for lack of design, before those physics are brought in, there still needs to be a solid foundation of good game design in an interesting and meaningful context which these physics systems can support and enhance. Too often I feel these VR titles focusing on physics will massively overutilize them, where instead a more traditional method of animation and scripts would be better suited to provide an experience far more interesting, fun, and meaningful, with the physics being turned on selectively as the cherry on top to emphasize action and reward the player. balance, and curation. This is why I still posit the most enjoyable, meaningful, and satisfying VR melee game I've played to date is Until You Fall. A wonderful composition of mostly traditional design with minimal physics, but implements them sparingly and elegantly in moments where it matters, and that subtly add meaningful depth to player interactions where it makes sense to do so. I strongly urge any VR developers to watch Until You Fall's GDC Dev Talk to learn more about their design challenges and philosophies, as they too were also going to go the full physics route before changing their minds when considering some of the pitfalls I've mentioned in this video. I'll have the video linked in the description. A good example of a VR game that uses physics as a primary is Underdogs. I suggest you play it. That's literally the only game I can think of which I've played. And other VR titles which come to mind this moment that kind of use a little bit of physics to effect, but not overly so, is Rumble, Vertigo 2, and of course, Half-Life Alyx. To conclude, all the physics in the world will not matter if your fundamental game design is shallow, boring, and brain-dead, primarily because you need to accommodate those physics. All the fancy possibilities a player might be able to do are pointless if there is no reason, genuine meaning, or rewarding feedback for the player to do them, especially when it comes to the enemies and primary conflict in your game. For the love of God, put some more I in your AI and add some more design flair and personality to your enemies while you're at it. Nothing destroys these physics-focused experiences faster than having a primary conflict which is a complete, exploitable joke and a waste of a player's time and energy. We can do better. We did do much better not so long ago.